We have reached the halfway point of the 2026 MLB season, which means if you're trying to climb up the standings, better make some ads now before it gets too late. We've got 20 names for you to pick up here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome everybody to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by SeatGeek. Erik Halterman here for the second time today. I got to do my best Todd Zola impression, filling in for him on the Two Start Pitcher podcast with Clay Link earlier today. And now, as with every Friday afternoon, I'm joined by Jeremy Schneider for a look at the top players to pick up this weekend. And Jeremy, we were discussing just before the show, not the best week for pickups, which is not the best way to introduce a waiver pickups podcast, I'm sure. Tune out now. We've still got a decent number of names. There's no real big call up.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone that necessarily stands out this week, but these sort of weeks are really important still because, teams have those needs. And so you still got to kind of get through. And even if the pickings are a little more slim, got to kind of make those waiver wire additions one way or another.
We will have plenty of names for you today. And if you're wondering why we aren't discussing one interesting call up, don't worry. We will get to him in the Deep League section. But for now, let's jump right into it with the priority pickups. These are guys who are available in at least half of Yahoo leagues, not always available in your deeper leagues. Some of these guys will be just emerging into broader fantasy relevance everywhere. But let's start with a guy who is probably snapped up in those deeper two-catcher leagues, but you're suggesting might be worth it in a shallower format. Who is that?
We're going to kick things off with Francisco Alvarez of the New York Mets, a guy that definitely is well rostered across deeper leagues, but just at a 20% roster ownership on Yahoo. And I get it to a certain extent. Alvarez was dealing with an injury. He had surgery on a torn meniscus that he recently came back from, but he's been great since returning to action. 14 games, he's hitting .294 with 4 home runs and 8 RBI since returning to the lineup. There has not been necessarily a lot of good surrounding the Mets right now, but there's no denying that Alvarez has been hot since getting back. When you look at the overall season numbers, it's nothing jaw-dropping, but from the catcher position, it certainly is enough. He's hitting .258 with a .762 OPS, 8 home runs, 18 RBIs in 51 games. Kind of looking under the hood with Alvarez, a 16.7% barrel rate is in the 95th percentile. 489 expected slugging percentage is 86th percentile. So this is a guy that has that juice. He has the power to be a notable home run hitter, and his expected WOBA is a decent bit higher than his current WOBA at 335 compared to the expected mark at 352. I think Alvarez is someone that maybe the discourse is a little distorted around because he was the number one prospect in baseball. He was a consensus, next man up, and maybe he hasn't lived up to the expectations of being a superstar. But across his career, a 739 OPS, 107 WRC plus, it's solid. And he's playing well enough recently with enough slug that I think if you're in need of a catcher, Alvarez has done enough since returning from injury to make him a very viable fantasy option.
Yeah, Alvarez hits the ball very hard. That barrel rate, which you mentioned, is second best among all catchers behind only Drake Baldwin. And Alvarez doesn't strike out that often either, just a 24% strikeout rate this year. It's his career best, but not that far out of line with where he's been the last few years, 25, 26%. So a guy who I agree there's been a little bit of, fatigue or something with this guy, but he's just 24 years old and does a lot of things right. I think he definitely should be on the radar in one catcher leagues. And I think that also may be true of Kyle Teal of the White Sox, who gave us a pretty good half season last year, hit .273 with 8 homers, also 3 steals in 78 games, but then missed half of this season dealing with hamstring and knee issues. Could be some rust to shake off, certainly. He has gone 1 for 7 since his return. Too early to say anything meaningful. But Edward Cuero was sent back down. This is very much Kyle Teal's job. He is going to be a primary catcher going forward, and I think he'll be a pretty good one. Should hit for reasonable power and reasonable average as well, and he's considered a pretty decent defender. This is just a pretty good all-around catcher who we were drafting pretty early back before the news of his injury. So I think now that Kyle Teal is available again, if you have one of the worst couple catchers in a one catcher league, consider looking his way, and definitely in any two catcher format, Kyle Teal should be snapped up, right?
I agree. I think Teal doesn't have the length in his big league career of Alvarez, but he showed plenty of promise last year in 78 games. I think his knack for getting on base and being able to be a positive in the batting average department makes him a pretty viable option.
All right, should we go over to you for? Did I just steal your guy? Is that what
You
happened? I
you
am
you
very
did
confused.
you did a
I
little bit.
Wow, I am. You know what? I've hosted too many shows today. I knew that we were going from one catcher to another, but actually we're not. Oh well, sorry for stealing your thunder with Kyle Teal. Do you want to steal my thunder with one of the guys I wrote down to discuss myself?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about Dylan Cruz, who, going back to the idea of some fatigue, I think Cruz is someone that goes along with that, but it's a little different compared to Alvarez because Cruz has majorly struggled in the big leagues and overall across 32 games this year. The numbers are not great on the surface, hitting 230 with a 651 OPS, but he has been running hot of late. He's hitting 308 with 4 extra base hits over the past 10 games. And when you look at his profile kind of deeper, he's someone that throughout his career has kind of been, I guess, for lack of a better term, unlucky in terms of the difference between his batted ball numbers and the actual results. Same thing has kind of applied this year where he has a 286 WOBA compared to a 326 X WOBA. And so maybe that suggests that his current hot stretch is more of, positive regression to the mean than a fluke. And I think if that's the case, Cruz is certainly someone that you want to have with legitimate pedigree. We haven't necessarily seen the speed translate into stolen bases this year with just 3 stolen bases, but the speed is certainly there. And the consistent playing time. Washington is going to give him as much run as possible. So I think if Cruz is able to continue this, he's someone you want to get in on. I think one thing that works against him, if we're being painting the full picture, so he has just 2 walks in 128 plate appearances, a 1.6% walk rate. Does no favors in terms of getting in a rhythm with consistency. So there certainly are still some problems with Dylan Cruz, but he's playing well right now. And I think if you're one of those believers in the law of averages and things starting to tick back towards how they should based on the underlying numbers, I think he's definitely worth considering.
Yeah, I still can't believe that I just stole your guy and could not read our own outline here. And I can't believe you didn't call me out on it. Thank you. Very,
Well,
very polite of you.
I was letting you go. I mean, you said everything that I would have said anyways. So
Yeah, and you more or less said what I was going to say with Dylan Cruz. I was going to say that if you were waiting to see something in the big leagues, right? I think we had him as a deep league ad when he first got recalled because, what if he does finally turn the corner? And he didn't the first few weeks. So if you were in a shallower format and you wanted to see something from Dylan Cruz before taking the chance, well, he's now shown something. So I think I would take the chance on him now if this is the breakthrough, the guy that we think he can be is quite a good player, somebody who could contribute across all 5 categories. So if we're seeing some signs now, maybe this is the time to go out and grab Dylan Cruz. Should I steal one more of your guys? No, I think I'll go with the guy who I actually put down on the rundown here. That is Matt Shaw of the Cubs, who I did not think was a very smart pick during draft season because it seemed pretty clear that he was not going to play regularly enough to matter in most fantasy formats, and that was more or less true for a while. But unfortunately for me and for the Cubs, Moises Ballesteros has played his way back to the minors, which has opened up the DH spot, which is primarily now going to Seiya Suzuki, which has in turn opened up the right field spot, which is where Matt Shaw is now working into the lineup more regularly. It's still not necessarily a true everyday role for him, but we're getting closer. He has hit pretty well since he returned from the IL. He dealt with a little back issue in late May and early June. He was on a good roll. He's hitting, 258 in 11 games since his return, but has a homer and a steal as well. League average strikeout rate. The overall pick for Matt Shaw is still not quite that exciting, but there's something there across all 5 categories. If you look at his overall numbers between last year and this year, it's 577 plate appearances. So basically, one full season. He's got 17 homers, 21 steals, just a 231 average. But I would think that the batting average should go up. He only strikes out 21% of the time. And the hard hit rate is much better this year, up at 35% after it was just 29% last year. There's still not a lot in any one category. It's only 4 homers and 4 steals this season. But there's something across all of them, and there's more regular at bats for Matt Shaw now. It's still going to be fringy in a lot of leagues, I think, but the overall package should add up to enough in a lot of formats. Would you agree?
I'm definitely intrigued by Matt Shaw. I think comes up with solid pedigree. We've seen some different stretches of success. There's nothing underlying that says he's, ripe for a full breakout right now. But I think playing time trending in the right direction is the biggest part of this. He's back in the lineup for today's game, but Michael Conforto started in right field the previous 2 contests. So I think that's going to be the number one thing. If he's playing every day, he's going to have a chance to uh, you know, be fantasy relevant. If he's only playing a couple times a week, it's not the case. And that sort of thing, we can only wait and see.
Yep, but it seems like the trend is a positive one for Shaw. We'll see how long that continues. Back to you for your next name. Who do you got?
Next up, we are looking at Josh Bell, first baseman for the Minnesota Twins, a guy who has kind of just stuck around baseball for a long time and continued to produce one way or another. The overall numbers for Bell this year don't really stand out at 245 with a 696 OPS, in terms of the rate stats, but he has been quite the run producer with 49 RBIs, 9 home runs to boot as well in 79 games. And if there's one thing about Josh Bell, the big switch hitter, he can get hot in a hurry, and that is what he has been lately, hitting 361 over the past 10 games. You go to the whole month of June, he's hitting 312 with 9 extra base hits, 17 RBIs. Overall, that 49 RBI mark ranks tied for 20th in Major League Baseball this year. So, even if Bell is unable to keep up quite this hot level of play, the fact of the matter is he's a fixture in the middle of the Twins lineup. And even if, even if he runs cold, because we know the cold stretch is going to come at some point with Josh Bell, he's just well positioned to keep on driving in runs. So maybe he's not the most exciting high upside ad because we kind of know who Josh Bell is. He is a run producer, and that is certainly something that you cannot take for granted at this point in the year for fantasy baseball.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Josh Bell just keeps doing what he does, which usually involves a midseason trade, and maybe after the trade deadline, we're looking at him falling into less than a true full-time role, and he'll be less exciting. But when Josh Bell's on, I think he's a 10 and 12 team league guy. When he's not quite on, still has some value in 15 teamers due to his regular playing time. We'll go back to my final priority hitter in just a minute, but first I want to throw in this question about Matt Shaw from Joe in the comments here. He says Royce Lewis or Matt Shaw in a Roto league. That's an interesting one because Royce Lewis also doesn't give you a lot, but he could. Things have been a little bit better since he's returned from injury. Maybe I should say a lot better because things were so bad before he got hurt. Since his return to, or not hurt, right? This was actually just a demotion.
Just straight
I'm
demotion this
just,
time.
I'm just on
Programmed
default
for
with
it,
Royce
yeah.
Lewis. Of course, it was always an injury, but in this case, it was just an injury to his ability to hit. Since his return from the demotion, he has been hitting 273 with an 829 OPS, has 4 homers in just shy of 20 games, 2 steals as well. If you told me that this was the guy Royce Lewis was going to continue to be, I'd probably take him over Shaw because I'm worried Shaw could lose his playing time. But I'm also worried Royce Lewis could turn back into the guy he was before he went down. So I'm pretty torn on this one. Which way would you lean, Jeremy?
I think I would lean Lewis. An important part of he's overall been great since returning. Over the last 10 games, he's been a little more down to earth, hitting 200. But I think the what he's shown across the whole, what is it, a 17 game sample size since returning, I think that is a little more exciting to me than what Shaw has done, with the added fact that we've seen Royce Lewis produce more in the big leagues. I didn't want to say for an extended period of time, because usually once we get to what you would consider an extended period of time, he, as you alluded to, gets hurt. But I think Lewis has shown me a little more in the past, and I feel like the path for regular playing time, manning first base, I'm a little more confident in Lewis, but not necessarily a super confident lean.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. I think I'd lean Lewis slightly, but I don't think it'd be crazy for somebody to take the opposite side of that argument. My final priority hitter here is Nasim Nunez of the Nationals. Now, Nasim Nunez has been useful in deep leagues throughout the year because he has everyday playing time and because he has a ton of steals. But in a lot of shallower formats, even though he has 31 steals already, which lead the league, he's still not been very good because he's tied with you and I, listener, for home runs with zero. Also has zero barrels, so it's not like he's leaving a lot of potential homers on the table. He's got a 21% hard hit rate. This is basically Chandler Simpson if Chandler Simpson didn't have a very good hit tool. Chandler Simpson, of course, runs single digit strikeout rates. Nasim Nunez runs league average strikeout rates, yet hits the ball just as hard. It sounds like I'm mostly just giving reasons not to pick up this guy, which is kind of true. I mean, there are reasons why he was not picked up in these shallower formats for much of the season, but Nasim Nunez is on fire in the month of June, hitting 383, 9 steals this month as well. He's actually striking out a little bit more this month, though, so I wouldn't say I'm fully bought into this streak from Nunez, and there still is a world where his bat just bottoms out and he loses playing time. But as of right now, there's no threats. So while he's hot, if you are behind in steals, go add Nasim Nunez for a few weeks, and he'll shoot you back up at the steals category all by himself. And this is rare outlier speed. That's just all there is. So you can either pick this guy up several weeks ago or ignore him all year, depending on your format, right?
I think you put it perfectly. A classic one category guy. And right now, though, it feels a lot easier to pick him up because he is hitting 383 in 20 June games. Is there any reason to expect that to continue? No. But even if you can get in on him while he's hitting well just for a little bit, you know what you're getting with the speed. 31 stolen bases is truly no joke. And that stolen base activity can definitely soften the blow if, or realistically, when the bat comes back down.
All right, let's move on over to the priority pitchers. Who is your first guy in this category, Jeremy?
On the mound, we're starting with Sean Burke of the Chicago White Sox. Talked about a number of different White Sox pitchers throughout this season. Burke is an interesting one. On the year, a 3.71 ERA, 1.21 WHIP, an 87 to 30 strikeout to walk ratio with 5-4 record in 16 starts. Burke, I think those numbers off the rip don't necessarily scream anything super special, but I love where he's trending over his past two starts. 13 and two-thirds innings, allowing just 2 runs and a stellar 14 strikeouts to 2 walks. I think an important thing to add is that both of those runs across those two starts were allowed on solo home runs. And he allowed a pair of home runs in each of his previous starts. So, to be very clear, Sean Burke struggles with the home run ball. That is a concern to be aware of. But I think that there's a lot on the periphery to still like and make him a viable ad. His overall strikeout rate at 23.9% isn't jaw dropping, but it's up to 27.3% since the beginning of May. That's equal to over 10 strikeouts per nine. And the upcoming matchups it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Monday, he's slated to take on Baltimore, who ranks 8th by WRC plus against right-handed pitching. But then his next start is lined up to come against Cleveland next Saturday, who rank 25th against right-handed pitching in WRC plus. So Sean Burke, not a perfect pitcher by any means, but I think he qualifies as a potentially useful addition for managers in need of pitching help. Certainly trending in the right direction.
Yeah, slightly better than average in both strikeouts and walks. That'll clear the bar in most formats as long as things are going pretty well for him and as long as you pitch for a team that can give you chances of wins, which of course the White Sox are, as everybody predicted heading into the year. Nothing too special, but a totally solid arm who is likely been ignored to this point in a lot of shallower formats. Somebody who was ignored probably in most formats until pretty recently is Ian Seymour of the Rays, because for most of the year, Ian Seymour was, what do we call him, a middle reliever, I guess, a long man, sometimes a setup man, a very occasional member of the closer committee. He has 2 saves this year. There was some real fantasy buzz for Seymour heading into the year because it looked like he had a chance at the 5th starter job and a chance to become an important part of a closer committee. Neither of those happened, but he is now entering the starting rotation, slash being used as a bulk reliever after a opener, which is how he was used yesterday against the Royals, and it could not have gone any better. 6 2/3 hitless innings, 7 strikeouts, and 1 walk following an opener there. Ian Seymour, pretty good pitcher, and since he's been in a rotation role, it's 6 runs in 19 innings with 19 strikeouts and 5 walks. I think we're seeing the guy we thought we might see heading into the year. So if you were at all in on Ian Seymour as a potential sleeper, I think it's time to go grab him now. It's a guy with a solidly above average strikeout rate. It was 26% last year, 25% this year. The walks are up a little bit to 10% this season, so you'd like to see him get those in check, especially if he's going to keep going deep into games as a starter. But on the whole, it's a pretty interesting pitcher who had some buzz back in February and March and now has the role to back up that buzz. So I'd go take a shot on Ian Seymour, even in some shallower formats. We've recommended him in deeper leagues before, but I think Ian Seymour you can consider just about anywhere right now, right?
I'm in. I think one of the big things with Seymour was building up the workload, and he threw 90 pitches yesterday. And if that workload is picking up where he's going to be able to go, long enough to qualify for the wins in games that he starts, as opposed to being the bulk reliever, that's a really intriguing option. I think some folks might be deterred by a pretty pedestrian 4.3 ERA, but I wouldn't be. He gave up 5 runs in the first outing of the year, and from there has been significantly better. So I think Seymour's someone that I would add while you still can.
All right, over to you for your final priority ad. Who do you got? Someone else on the mound?
Another starting pitcher, Joey Cantillo of the Cleveland Guardians, who's a really interesting case in terms of a guy that had some pretty notable buzz around draft season. Uh, kind of seen as a guy that could definitely take a step forward after showing a good bit of promise in 2025 across 95 innings. And it's been a little up and down for Joey Cantillo this year. His ERA at 4.05 with a 1.4 whip. 76 to 37 strikeout to walk ratio, and a 6-3 record through 16 starts. And Cantillo has, I get it. In shallower leagues, he was really struggling to close May and open June, to the point where his rostership was going down. But if you did hold on to Joey Cantillo, you had the opportunity to get 13 innings of 2-run ball over his last 2 starts, with a 13-1 strikeout to walk ratio. And the biggest thing for me on Cantillo, why I'm a big fan, is we talk a lot about small sample sizes of guys improving. And, it's not necessarily sustainable. They just can have a good start. But what I really like about Cantillo moving forward is, against Houston in his most recent start, he threw his curveball 44 of 98 pitches, a 45% being a career high usage for what I would consider his most underutilized pitch on the year. And if this tinkering to the pitch mix holds up and he continues to use that curveball, which hitters are hitting an average 200 against, if he focuses on that curveball more to go along with a really strong changeup that is being used 28% of the time with a 165 batting average, focusing on those 2 pitches as opposed to his fastball, which is not nearly as effective despite being used the most with a opponent batting average of 305. I think the results can definitely continue to trend upward. There was a reason that Cantillo was well regarded going into the year, and so if this little bit of tinkering can kind of do the trick for Cantillo, I'm a big fan moving forward. Not to mention tonight, he's starting against Seattle, who rank 29th in the league against left-handed pitching. Then his next outing is lined up for Wednesday against Texas, who rank 18th against Southpaws. Feels like a combination of solid matchups moving forward on top of someone that I just refuse to give up on, considering he came into the year with hype and just ran into a couple of bad starts. So Joey Cantillo is someone that I'm very, very, very high on.
Yeah, I think you made a good case. Agree with everything you said there, except the pronunciation of his name. It's actually Cantillo, Italian, not Hispanic. It's Cantillo like tortellini, not Cantillo like tortilla.
My
It took
fault.
me way too long to get that one too. It looks like it should be Cantillo for sure. But you know what? He's putting himself on the map, and we're all going to know how to pronounce his name soon, I think. Wrapping up the priority pitchers here with Shane Bieber, which is technically cheating. We like to use a cutoff of 50% rostership on Yahoo. Everyone we've talked about so far has been under 40%. Bieber technically just over 50, but I did want to talk about him because he has just returned from a long injury layoff. And in weekly pickups leagues where you can't stash a guy before he's made his season debut, there's going to be some bidding wars potentially on Shane Bieber, who made it back from Tommy John surgery late last year and then wound up pitching many more innings than the Blue Jays would have expected, since they went all the way to Game 7 of the World Series, where Shane Bieber was pitching right down at the end there. So when the news emerged that he was going to have his workload monitored this season, it sounded like just a case of, well, makes sense. He threw more than we expected immediately after coming back from major surgery. Let's take things easy this year. But I don't really think that's actually what happened. They eventually started calling it forearm fatigue, and then he did not end up making it back until just earlier this week. So I think that's more than just managing the workload. So there's a real negative here that Shane Bieber has recently had a major elbow surgery and now seems to be dealing with more arm troubles, which he's supposedly through, but he did not look that good in his return to the rotation on Tuesday. Only went 3 2/3 against the Astros, gave up 4 runs on 9 hits, no walks, but he did only strike out 2. Pretty uninspiring there from Shane Bieber. So I would ask you, Jeremy, just how excited would you be to go out and grab Shane Bieber? Do you think he is somebody you'd want to have on your roster in all formats, or do you think this is maybe only a deep league pitcher until Shane Bieber proves his health?
I think it might be a case where he's a deep league pitcher until he proves his health, because when he's healthy, he's been great. Basically every single season of his career, when he's been healthy, he has been an effective pitcher. I think the days of him being a true frontline ace are probably behind him, but we know that he's been, if nothing else, serviceable when healthy. But I think for these shallower formats, I'd want to wait a little bit to see him string along starts, let alone positive starts, of course, before I'd want to really invest any sort of heavy fab into him.
Yeah, I think that seems fair to me. We will move on over to our Deep League ads right after these messages from our sponsors. SeatGeek. Do you know that sound? That's the ballpark roaring to life. That's 40,000 fans who didn't wait until next time. Look, we get it. Life gets busy, but here's the thing. Tonight's game is happening, whether you're there or not, and SeatGeek makes getting there ridiculously easy. As the official ticket marketplace of MLB, SeatGeek has seats to every ballpark, every matchup, every rivalry game you've been meaning to catch. Find last-minute tickets, compare prices so you know you're getting a good deal, and buy with confidence thanks to the buyer guarantee. Forget scrolling through someone else's stadium photos. Forget the wish I was there comments. Tonight, you could be the one posting. Because the best baseball memories, they don't happen on your couch. They happen when you grab your crew, head to the park, and let the game take over. Open SeatGeek or buy tickets directly from RotoWire via the MLB lineups page. Your seats are waiting. We're also brought to you by Gridiron Trivia. If you're the kind of sports fan who can't help but debate stats, remember random NFL facts, or spend way too much time thinking about fantasy football, you've got to check out Gridiron Trivia. It's a daily NFL trivia app packed with fun game modes like Red Zone, where you identify players based on stat clues, Reverse Immaculate, which flips the classic grid challenge on its head, and Higher Lower, where every choice can make or break your streak. Whether you're looking to challenge your friends in private rooms or compete against football fans from around the world, there's always a new way to test your NFL knowledge. Baseball season might be in full swing, but football fans know there's never really an off season. Download Gridiron Trivia today by clicking the link in the description or searching Gridiron Trivia in the App Store or Google Play. And welcome back, everybody, to RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by SeatGeek. Erik Halterman here with Jeremy Schneider, going over our top pickups of the week. We've gone over the shallower league ads. Let's move on to the deeper leagues, starting on the mound, where I do want to throw in one headline here, Jeremy. This showed up just before the show. Tony Santillan, who had been the temporary closer for the Reds, is heading to the IL with what's being called a significant oblique strain. Santillan had just turned his season around and had 3 saves in his last 4 appearances, so tough timing for him. Not the worst timing for the Reds, though, because Emilio Pagan has started a rehab assignment as he works his way back from a hamstring strain. So if there's anyone to add here for the Reds bullpen, it's probably just double check that Pagan isn't still out there in your league, right? I mean, somebody else might get a save in the next 3 or 4 days, but it's probably not worth adding anybody else in this pen, I don't think.
Definitely not. This is a bullpen that has struggled mightily, if we're even putting that kindly. So I think Pagan is slated to come back in the very near future. I don't think it's necessarily worth trying to find any saves for the brief time in between while both are on the injured list.
All right. It might, however, be worth picking up some of these deep league pitchers, including a guy who has a 5.43 ERA. Make the case for your first name here, Jeremy.
Getting right into the bad stuff with Brandon Sproat of the Milwaukee Brewers. And it is true, a 5.43 ERA to go along with a 1.35 whip in 15 appearances. You don't hear that and immediately think must add. But there are a couple compelling reasons for Brandon Sproat to be joining your fantasy team, which first and foremost is his last start, which was clearly the best start of his season. 6 innings without allowing any runs on just 1 hit, no walks, 10 strikeouts against those Cincinnati Reds we were just talking about. And this is, I don't want to say what the expectation was for Sproat when he got here, but Sproat was a very well-regarded prospect, headlining the Freddie Peralta deal alongside Jet Williams. This isn't someone that comes with no pedigree, despite struggling so far this year. So I think the outing against Cincinnati is definitely a step in the right direction for Sproat. But there are also a couple other factors at play. I don't think that it's necessarily just one start that dictates him being a must-add, nor do I think he is a must-add, I should clarify. But we've seen improvement overall across the month of June. In 4 starts this month, a 3.48 ERA, a sub-1 whip, and the walks have been down. A 21-5 strikeout to walk rate is imperative. Through the first 10 starts for Sproat, he was walking over 5 batters per 9, and that sort of thing just doesn't cut it. You can't walk that many guys and come out successful. But the walk starting to tick down, I think it's a lot more, intriguing with Sproat to believe that he can turn a corner. In terms of strikeouts, a 24.7% strikeout rate ranks in the 65th percentile. His repertoire, the fastball and sinker, run north of 96 miles per hour and are pretty effective to go along with that improving control, which is first and foremost the most important thing. I think he could definitely benefit from cutting down on his cutter, which he throws about a quarter of the time, and opposing hitters are hitting 341 against. But the number one thing for me, I guess, even above the 6 innings of no runs, which I just claimed was the number one thing, is we're talking about the Milwaukee Brewers, a team that is good and is going to set him up for an opportunity to get wins when he's able to log those 5 innings. But the biggest part with the Brewers is they're a great organization for developing pitching. So I know Sprout struggles early on. You're like, oh, maybe this guy just isn't any good and he'll never be any good. If he's doing that for a lot of organizations, I could believe that sentiment. but the Milwaukee Brewers do as good as any organization in baseball in terms of maximizing their pitchers. So with Sproat showing some signs, I think the Brewers player development has given some level of benefit of the doubt that this could turn real. And matchup wise, he's slated for a rematch with the Reds on Monday, ranked 28th in the league by WRC Plus against righties. Following that up with a date with Arizona, who are a tick worse at 29th. I think both in terms of matchups and maybe the truth that he's starting to turn a corner, and Brandon Sproat might just be a fix for you in these deep leagues.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of reasons why you jump in on Sprout sooner than you would other guys who've had just one or two good starts and mediocre season numbers. I think the prospect pedigree and the fact that he is a Brewer, a team that is going to help him find what works, I think those are reasons that I would buy in on Sprout after one dominant start, whereas with other guys, I might write it off as a fluke. So I think that makes a lot of sense. My next name has an even worse ERA than Brandon Sproats, so we really crushing it this section. How about a guy with an ERA of 609? That is David Peterson, who was recently traded from the Mets to the Cubs for very little, as far as I could tell, which is a reflection of how far Peterson's stock has fallen. It's also a reflection of how desperate the Cubs are for starting pitching. They did get Matthew Boyd back from his playing with his kids injury, but they have recently lost Edward Cabrera and Ben Brown, potentially for extended periods. There's a full rotation's worth of pitchers on the IL for the Cubs right now. Justin Steele, Cade Horton, Edward Cabrera, Ben Brown, and Jameson Taillon. That is a competitive MLB rotation right there. Eventually, Peterson might have to move back to the bullpen, but it's going to be a while till the first of those guys comes back. And even when they do start coming back, Peterson would just have to beat out Colin Ray or Javier Assad to stick around a little bit longer. Now, given the way he's pitched this year, that's not all that likely, but well, he does have a 609 ERA. It comes with a 405 xFIP, a 414 SIERA. Those numbers suggest he's pitched perfectly fine. His strikeout rate of 20% is too low. His walk rate of 9% is a bit too high, but he does at least have a 51% ground ball rate, which can help offset that. If he's managing contact well, he's at least doing something. And neither the strikeout nor the walk rate is terrible. They're both just slightly worse than average. Also, when you stick him in front of a pretty good Cubs infield defense, a ground ball heavy approach should play up there. This is not some stud, but it is a guy who is going to have, I think, some real leash over the next month or two in front of a good defense. And I think that should be pretty good enough to make David Peterson at least much more interesting after this trade than he was before. Are you at all interested in David Peterson, or are you scared off by a 609 ERA and a 165 whip?
I'm admittedly a little scared off, but not entirely. Because when you have a guy that runs over 50% ground ball rate, gets a clear upgrade in defense with the Cubs, and just the general change of scenery boost, I think it's not hard to be able to sell yourself on David Peterson despite the high ERA. And especially, I mean, the runway and the rotation is pretty obvious. The Cubs need arms. If something happens to Peterson, they might have to call you, Erik, to fill some innings. So just the opportunity in the rotation for him could be worth the gamble if you're in need of starting pitching.
I can still probably hit 52. I think that could go pretty well for the Cubs there. But we have been recommending a bunch of pitchers with terrible ERAs so far, and let's continue that streak. Who you got next, Jeremy?
Yeah, the next guy not only has a terrible ERA, but technically, I believe, is not on the big league roster at this moment, that being Brandon Pfaadt of the Arizona Diamondbacks, who in 38 innings posted a 5.92 ERA and 1.50 whip. Those being three starts among the 13 total appearances, because he was moved to the bullpen in mid April after starting as a starter. Kind of struggled across the board even after moving to the bullpen. So the club sent him down to AAA Reno, stretched back out as a starter in the beginning of June. And so far, the results in Reno have been pretty solid. He has made three starts with a 1.80 ERA and a 0.80 whip with a 7-2 strikeout to walk ratio. I think an important thing to note among that is 10 innings across 3 starts. He has yet to, you know, go beyond 3 2/3 innings. So in terms of being stretched out, Brandon Pfaadt may not fully be there. But improved results is certainly notable. To do it in the PCL is a good development. Fought kind of like Peterson is a heavy ground ball pitcher with a 50.8% ground ball rate, good for the 86th percentile. Uses a deep six pitch mix, but struggles with the effectiveness of his hard stuff, the sinker and fastball. Um, Fought looked like he was going to get some immediate traction in terms of that he was supposed to be recalled and start today against Tampa Bay, but the Diamondbacks shuffled things around after a rainout yesterday. It's looking like he's projected to start against the Giants for the Diamondback series starting next week, which would set him up for a draw with the lowly Padres offense if he were to get a start after that. And so I'm getting to the point where a lot of this is speculation. So this recommendation might end up being a wash. But the fact of the matter is, Ryan Nelson was transferred to the 60-day injured list with an elbow injury. Michael Soroka is out right now as well. Mitch Bratt made a spot start the other day, but was sent down shortly thereafter, to the point where all of it lines up for it still being fought. It would be nice if he was starting today and we had the certainty. But I think that it still sets up for Fott to have a little bit of runway, at least through the All-Star break. I don't know if the effectiveness will necessarily get there because we're not talking about someone with a fantastic big league track record. But look, the theme so far from this section of the deep league pitchers is guys that haven't necessarily performed yet but are going to have opportunities, and I think Fott can fit that.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable enough. Just in case he doesn't end up actually making it back to the majors, because the next start for him is still uncertain after that rainout, as you mentioned. I will give you two or maybe three pitchers with my next recommendation here. The guy I have down on the sheet is Reynaldo Lopez, who recently got the call to return to the Atlanta rotation after J.R. Ritchie was sent down. Ritchie, somebody I recommended in previous weeks, tentatively, just saying, if this does work out, there could be some real payoff here for a guy who could start every 5 games for one of the better teams in the league. It was not working out for Ritchie, so he's back down in AAA for now. But that same logic about just how good this spot in the Atlanta rotation is, that applies to Lopez, who is starting today against the Giants. If you could run out and add him for that, I certainly would. And if he sticks around in the rotation, I think Reynaldo Lopez should be reasonable enough. He struggled early on this season, especially when he was in the rotation, although actually he wasn't giving up a lot of runs in his first few starts, but the strikeout and walk numbers were fairly shaky. Then he moved into the pen and was all right, but nothing special. He has been pitching much better lately, though. 6 of his last 7 outings have seen him giving up 0 earned runs. On the whole, the numbers are unremarkable, but this is a guy who had a 1.99 ERA just 2 years ago. So if he can get even a quarter of the way back to that, we could be looking at a pretty interesting arm. To be fair, he only has a 3.50 ERA on the season, so things have gone well enough. The reason why I'm not that excited to add Reynaldo Lopez is the Braves still have 2 more pitchers in the minors who are probably better than him and could get the call if he slips up. We have Hurston Waldrop, who returned from injury but stuck in the minors because his first few rehab starts didn't go particularly well. He has been doing a little bit better. He's only allowed 1 run on 2 hits over his last 2 starts, although did walk 4 batters in one of those. So the overall picture for Waldrop still a little shaky. I think eventually, once he looks fully healthy, he probably could get some chances ahead of Reynaldo Lopez. And the same thing could be said for AJ Smith-Shawver, who has been out all year but is just starting up a rehab assignment of his own. If AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop is ready to go soon-ish, then I think that Reynaldo Lopez probably doesn't stick in the rotation for long, but it's completely unknown when they'll call up Waldrop. He's healthy. He's just not fully stretched out or fully back to his usual level. And Smith-Shawver probably has another full month. He's working his way back from Tommy John surgery, so it's not going to be a brief rehab assignment there. So Reynaldo Lopez, I think for the short term, maybe through the All-Star break, something like that, a pretty respectable end of your roster starter who should give you some pretty decent win chances for as long as he can stick in that Atlanta rotation. Do you buy Lopez, or would you rather just stash Waldrop or Smith-Shawver?
I think I'd be interested in Lopez for the short term. You outlined very well the fact that his stay in the rotation might not be long term. I think the Braves kind of see him maybe as more valuable as a multi-inning guy out of the bullpen. But we've seen him have success as a starter. He was great in 2024. I think that 1.99 ERA is probably not the best indicator of what you're getting with him now. But I think there's enough with Lopez. He doesn't give up super hard contact. And as long as he's, qualifying for the win, getting enough length out of him, the Braves, they've been struggling of late, but are still a team that I like pitching in. And, I think going back to J.R. Ritchie, talking about him a couple weeks ago, might not have been the perfect suggestion, but starting pitching is so hard to come by. And when you're looking to try to get wins, the Braves have been a really good team. And he was a guy with pedigree. So I know that was one that might not have turned out well, but I just wanted to, from my end, give you some grace on that call.
Yeah, there's certain rotations out there where you want to target whoever's the fifth starter, even if you don't think that fifth starter is all that talented. The Dodgers, the Braves, Brewers probably fit that as well. Maybe the Yankees, although they haven't been in that situation recently. The Rays, I guess, with Ian Seymour, who we mentioned earlier, they're doing well enough that you might throw them in there as well. I don't think you'd say the same for the Arizona Diamondbacks, but you have a Diamondback starter as our final deep league pitcher ad nonetheless. Tell me more about this guy.
Going back to the desert for our last deep league pitcher. If you want a good ERA, you can't get better than what Jose Cabrera has done so far. Made his big league debut this past Sunday against the Twins, and he went 5 shutout innings. So 0.00 ERA. That's what you can expect moving forward, I guess. No, not really. But a little more about Cabrera before he made his big league debut. He made 12 starts between AA Amarillo and AAA Reno, where he posted a respectable 3.69 ERA and a 1.03 whip with a 64 to 16 strikeout to walk ratio. And Cabrera's a little bit of an unknown, considering he wasn't really on prospect radars. His overall minor league numbers through the years have been fine, but not standout. He's just 24, though. He's a young arm. The repertoire doesn't throw super hard. A 94.6 mile an hour fastball is respectable, but the way that he was able to succeed in his first start was an extended repertoire with 6 pitches, pretty evenly distributed, and focusing more on the cutter than the fastball. As the cutter, he threw 24.2% of the time, his highest distribution. And I wish I could really go at length about Jose Cabrera as I have on some of these other guys, but this is someone that came a little bit out of nowhere. But what we do know is he is slated to make another start, that being tomorrow against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is a pretty solid offense against right-handed pitching, 6th all year long. But overall, they've been a little sleepy in June, 21st by WRC Plus this month. So I think the opportunity is there for him to kind of keep things rolling. And as alluded to when I was talking about Brandon Pfaadt, there are multiple spots open in the Diamondbacks rotation between Ryan Nelson long term and Michael Soroka at the least short term. That if you want to kind of take a chance on a little more unheralded of an option, Jose Cabrera certainly looms as someone that fits.
Yeah, I can't say I'm super sold on this guy. Wasn't even a top 400 prospect. Did have pretty interesting numbers in 9 AA starts, though, earlier this year, a 29% strikeout rate with a 6% walk rate. Never really showed that kind of bat missing ability before that, and saw his strikeout rate dip to 22% in 3 AAA starts. So there's not a lot to look at, but his overall numbers this year are pretty good, and he has an opportunity in front of him, like you said. So might be a pop-up prospect who turns out to be a pretty solid back-end starter type or more. Let's move on over to the deep league hitters to end the show here, where I am going to throw in another headline which may affect some deep league ads here. That is that Marcelo Meyer, right about the time that we started today's show, landed on the injured list with a stress reaction in his left forearm. Not the most common injury, so don't have the clearest sense for what the timeline could be here. Maybe it's only temporary, but maybe there are some at bats opened up long term for who exactly? That's the question to you, Jeremy. They have called up Sung Chae Cheng, who is starting at shortstop today. Is it just going to be, well, a lot of the Boston infielders are injured. Isaiah Kiner is injured as well. So is Trevor Story, of course, for a long time. So is Nick Sogard. Romy Gonzalez has been out all year. There are at bats wide open in this Boston infield. Who do you think benefits from the Marcelo Meyer injury?
I'm not sure if there's an immediate clear answer. Anthony Siegler was someone that was called up recently and has seen a decent amount of playing time, performed well in a very, very small sample size. So that's the first name that comes to mind. Nate Eaton was also called back up recently and has held his own, but I'm not sure that there's anyone that stands out that I would immediately be running to add.
Yeah, Siegler is getting that regular playing time at second base, starting against both lefties and righties. So might be interesting. Andrew Monasterio is getting some time at shortstop. Maybe he's the guy. Not super excited, but in deep leagues, if there is somebody who emerges with most of the playing time, then sure. Playing time is important in these deeper formats. And playing time being important is the reason why this next guy is all the way down in this section of the show. That is Cooper Ingle, a pretty highly rated prospect for the Guardians. I believe he's the number 80 prospect here at RotoWire, a catcher who it looked like might get called up early in the year. He was off to a very hot start, and you might remember Bo Naylor was very much not off to a hot start. But the way the Guardians decided to solve that problem was not by calling up Ingle, but instead by trading for Patrick Bailey. And now Engel is up, but Patrick Bailey is obviously still there as the primary catcher, and Austin Hedges is there as the backup. If you have Patrick Bailey and Austin Hedges on your team, you very clearly have a type at catcher, and that type is glove over everything. Engel is a bat first catching prospect. I think he's projected to have enough glove to stick behind the plate, but if you have pretty high standards for how much glove you want from your catcher, maybe Engel as a rookie isn't going to meet those standards. His bat was good enough that it looks like he might be able to profile as a corner outfielder, and he has been getting a little bit of time in left field in the minors. Engel in 51 games, 12 homers, 967 OPS. This is a guy who can hit. And so if he plays 4 or 5 times a week, this is a guy with fantasy viability in all formats. As a catcher, certainly. It's just I'm not certain that he's going to have that playing time. I guess you could say why call him up if you're not going to play him, but we know that that's not always the case. Do you see enough at bats for Cooper Ingle to be someone who we probably should have talked about in the first section? I mean, if Cooper Ingle does play 5 or 6 times a week, maybe that's once behind the plate, once at DH, and 3 or 4 times in left field, then sure, I want Cooper Ingle, maybe even as one of the worst catchers in a one catcher league. But there's a good chance he plays a whole lot less than that. What would be your outlook for Cooper Ingle in the short term?
I think with Cooper Ingle, as you alluded to, if you are guaranteeing me that he's playing, 5 or 6 times a week, I would take the jump and say that he's an ad just about everywhere. But with Cleveland, there's so many moving parts in terms of performances and injury. Being called up right now, he's getting the opportunity to make his debut. But you have someone like Chase DeLauder who is slated to return at some point during this homestand, who gets a lot of his reps, either a designated hitter or in right field, that, either directly or indirectly affects Engel. And I'm unsure. I'm really unsure, because if you guaranteed me the playing time with Engel, I'd be very happy, because he's a very well-rounded hitter. He's, undersized. You don't necessarily see potent power potential, but he's already slugged a career high 12 home runs, the most among, that anywhere close that he's done in the minor leagues during this sort of sample size, and really elite plate discipline, good bat to ball skills. I'm in on Cooper Ingle, the player, but for right now, it's hard to put a ton of investment into him in some of these shallower leagues, considering we don't know the playing time.
Yeah, so maybe you add Ingle definitely in all deeper leagues, and then
Deeper
in
leagues for
shallower
sure.
leagues, yeah, in shallower leagues, if you have the luxury of being able to stick him on the bench for a week until you see what he's actually doing for the Guardians, then yes. If you need an impact at catcher this week, then maybe no. Is that maybe the best way to play it?
Well said. Yes.
All right, then let's go back to you for your first deep league hitter of the day.
My first deep league hitter, someone that kind of took me by surprise for sure, that being Ryan Kreidler of the Minnesota Twins. Someone that through his career has done little to nothing at the big league level, but has been fantastic this year for the Twins, hitting 281 with an 854 OPS in 100 plate appearances, particularly in the month of June, turning it up. Over his last 12 appearances, last 30 at bats, he's hitting 400, that being 12 for 30, with 3 extra base hits and 9 runs batted in. I think the playing time is an important part for Kreidler, where if he's not going to play super consistently, then there's not a ton of value. And it's worth noting that he's out of the lineup tonight in favor of Tristan Gray at shortstop, but he had started the past 5 games in a row. And when you dig deeper, the chances of him continuing to run out an OPS north of 800 should be a very tall task, considering his career mark is at 535. But the fact that his ex Woba is at a respectable 337 gives me some hope that while there's going to be some semblance of a come down for Kreidler, it's not pure fluke his success right now. And now, even once the numbers stabilize a little bit, he can be a respectable contributor in the short term. And I think short term is an important part of this. I'm not sure that he's going to be the starting shortstop all season long. Gray will continue to fight for playing time. Kalen Culpepper, one of the top offensive prospects for the Twins, is killing it in or I should say was killing it in AAA before landing on the injured list, which shouldn't keep him out too long. And so I think once Culpepper gets healthy, there's a good chance he's going to get called up and have an opportunity at shortstop. But for right now, the numbers kind of speak for themselves for Kreidler. There's always the chance that they come crashing down. That's kind of a theme with these deep league ads. But if he can just keep it going for a little bit, even tone down, it feels like the playing time is there. That if you need someone that can fill in as a shortstop or in the outfield with eligibility in both spots, someone that definitely was not on the radar early on, but worth considering now.
Yeah, I think the upside is very low with Ryan Kreidler. We're talking about a 28-year-old who had a WRC plus of 11 in 89 games heading into this year. But as you've said, he's hitting well right now, and he's not fluking his way to good numbers. So I think Ryan Kreidler, for now, is a pretty solid ad as long as the playing time is there. I will go with a teammate of Cooper Ingles, a fellow rookie for the Guardians. That is Khalil Watson, an outfielder who ranked 159th on James's latest top 400 prospect rankings here at RotoWire. Watson, a fantasy friendly sort of prospect, I would say. He has some swing and miss issues, but he has some power and he has some speed. In 56 minor league games this season, all at the AAA level, he struck out 28% of the time and only hit 255, but 12 homers and 15 steals. That's pretty promising. So far in 7 games, it's 1 homer and 1 steal and a 41% strikeout rate. So Watson might just not be able to hit big league pitching. He also might not be long for a regular role. When Chase DeLauter comes back, maybe Watson heads to the bench, or maybe he's able to stick around at least until Angel Martinez returns from his injury. I'm not super confident in the long-term viability of Watson, and if one of those guys returns quite soon, maybe Watson is only even in the big leagues for another week or so. But there's some real power, some real speed. I'm pretty intrigued by what Khalil Watson could be if he hits the high end of his outcomes and is able to stick around. It's not as if Angel Martinez, for all that he showed at times this season, it's not as if Martinez automatically deserves his everyday role back in the outfield once he's healthy. If Watson does hit well, I think you could see him sticking around for the long term. So somebody you're definitely taking a chance on if you pick him up, but there are worse players to take a chance on than a guy with power and speed and no real compelling options blocking his path if it does all work out. Do you see anything there with Khalil Watson?
A lot of tools in the toolbox for Khalil Watson, someone that was a first round pick back in 2021 to the Marlins, faded from the top tier of prospect spotlight. But I think he's done a nice job adjusting early on. You don't want to take too much from such a small sample size, but he started 0 for 12 and since then has gone 5 for 9. Uh, and, if that's not a compelling case to continue playing, then not sure what is. So I think the important thing to look at is how he plays ahead of Martinez and Delauder returning, which will have all the impact on his playing time. But for at least a brief swing, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Your final deep league hitter of the day, who do you got, Jeremy?
Closing things off, I have Griffin Conine of the Miami Marlins, someone who started the year, looking like he was going to be in a pretty regular role, but quickly suffered a left hamstring injury that he needed surgery on in early April. So since returning from the injured list on June 21st, that being earlier this week, the numbers have not been great. He's 1 for 11. But when you look at the whole sample size with Griffin Conine, there's something to like. And I know that off the rip, 212 batting average in the 14 total games that he's played, 36 plate appearances, isn't fantastic. But he's someone that hits the ball really hard. A 19% barrel rate, 52.4% hard hit rate, uh, 393 expected WOBA. And again, the sample size is small from just those 14 games, but it illustrates his sort of profile as someone that is going to make really loud contact. And in these deeper leagues, that's the sort of swing that you're looking for. He strikes out quite a bit, running at about 30% strikeout rate in each of his three sample sizes in the big leagues. But we haven't seen him get a truly extended look. In 2024, he came up and played 30 games. 2025, he was limited to 24 games due to injuries and, not a ton so far this year. But a 751 OPS with 7 home runs in 68 total games, that doesn't sound like someone, and hitting 253, that doesn't sound like someone that hasn't, shown that they can belong. And the biggest thing with him is Liam Hicks going to the injured list with a back injury positions him well to get opportunity as a designated hitter, if not the outfield against righties. And historically, not a significant platoon split. I think he's probably set up to be in a platoon situation to start, but that there could be the opportunity for the slugger to play against both-handed pitching.
Yeah, I feel like every single Marlins outfielder has this exact same stat page. Is that true? All of them strike out 30% of the time and have good barrel rates, and you're just hoping you land on the right one who's hot and gets enough playing time. I mean, they've got Kyle Stowers, and then they have like 6 Kyle Stowers Juniors, don't they?
Yes, very well put.
I don't know why that is what they specifically prefer, but they seem to really like Griffin Conine type. So hopefully that helps him play often enough to really matter in a lot of leagues. My final deep league hitter for today is Nick Lofton of the Royals, kind of in the Ryan Kreidler bucket. This is a 27-year-old who's been around for a few years and hasn't done much. He was better than Kreidler, but just a 617 OPS heading into this year. Lofton got his chance as a regular in late May. He actually was called up in late April, but was mostly a bench guy for a while. I guess he actually technically started the year on the big league roster, but was sent down right away, having barely played, and then came up as a bench bat and then stepped into a starting role in late May when Michael Garcia hit the IL with a hamstring injury. That turned out to be a pretty brief absence, but then Garcia got hurt again with a hand injury. He's back on the IL just about 2 weeks after he returned. Lofton is again stepping up as the regular in that Royals lineup. And overall, Nick Lofton has actually hit pretty well in 46 games. It's a 765 OPS, only hitting 248, but with just a 13% strikeout rate, I would expect that batting average to go up. A 7% barrel rate is not special, but it's not nothing either. So you got a guy who makes a lot of contact, and that contact is reasonably hard. That should add up to a pretty decent hitter. So far, just 3 homers and 1 steal in 46 games, which means the fantasy appeal isn't super large here. But if there is everyday playing time for a guy who puts the ball in play this often, at least in the short term, I imagine you're dropping Lofton once Michael Garcia gets healthy again, but it's unclear what his timeline is at the moment. So go grab a guy who's hot and playing regularly and drop him later. We'll sort that out when the time comes, right?
I think it's as simple as that. You got a guy running hot through the month of June, coming into regular playing time in these deep leagues. That's kind of all you really need to pull the trigger.
All right, that's going to do it for our 20 players to add this week. But before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the top plays of the night over on Smart Money. This is RotoWire's new tool for sports bettors, a great brainstorming tool. Throws out a whole bunch of different player props and the like based on where some of the sharpest bettors are putting their money on the exchanges. Hey, here's your guy, Griffin Conine, to go over half a homer today against the Cardinals. I did not see who is starting for the Cardinals today.
I believe
Let's
it's
look that
I
up.
believe it's Michael McGreevy who he's given up home runs in 3 straight starts. So, calling a home run pick is always tough, but I just laid out the case for Conine, so I can see the angle on it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable one. McGreevy allows a lot of contact and allows some homers, as you said. I could see this being Griffin Conine's night, so I think we'll leave it there. Smart Money agrees with our top pickup, or our, I guess, bottom pickup on today's show. That's going to do it for today. Thank you to everybody who hung out in the chat. Thank you to our sponsors, SeatGeek and Gridiron Trivia. The RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast will be back on Sunday. Jeff and Scott going over this week's top fab ads.